Either or. I love more, but I'm better with war. Metaphor, the warrior and peacemaker. Sometimes it takes war to have some peace from these haters. It can be.
This is purely a journalistic point of view. Nothing more has been said in this video other than that of which has been reported by various media sources and backed up with sources seen at the end of this video.
On the 1st May 2003 at around 5:30 AM, wrestler Lex Luger phoned 911 to report his girlfriend was not breathing. Despite resuscitation efforts, she did not respond and was rushed to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. The girlfriend was Elizabeth Hulette, better known as Miss Elizabeth, arguably the most beloved woman in the history of professional wrestling. Join us now as Behind the Titantron examines the death of Miss Elizabeth. Elizabeth Ann Hulette, the woman who would come to be nicknamed the First Lady of Professional Wrestling, was born on the 19th November 1960 in Frankfort, Kentucky. According to Mike Mooneyham, Hulette, a former Miss Kentucky, met future husband Macho Man Randy Savage, aka Randy Poffo, during the late 70s, while both were working for the Lexington, Kentucky-based International Championship Wrestling promotion run by Savage's father, Angelo Poffo. The Outlaw promotion competed against Jerry Jarrett's Memphis promotion until Poffo's organization folded. Savage joined Jarrett's Memphis group and worked a red-hot feud with the territory's top babyface, Jerry the King Lawler. At the time, Jimmy Hart was managing in Memphis, and when he jumped ship to the WWF, he reportedly put in a good word about Savage's work. According to George Steele, Vince McMahon originally wanted to pair a model with Savage, only for Savage to tell McMahon he already had a model, his wife, Elizabeth. She was brought to the WWF where Steele claims Savage had her practice 150 to 200 times on how to enter the ring, careful not to show too much leg. Her debut was tied in expertly with the debut of wrestling's hottest free agent. Randy Macho Man Savage didn't fit the mold of the WWF's big men, but his chiseled physique, incredible charisma, jaw-dropping intensity, and combination of brawling and aerial maneuvers made stardom likely, even in a world of giants. The WWF did things differently with Savage's arrival, pushing him as wrestling's hottest free agent. The WWF's heel managers began courting him to sign with one of them, and on the 24th of August 1985 edition of Championship Wrestling, Mr. Fuji, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Johnny Valiant, Classy Freddie Blassie, and Jimmy Mouth of the South Hart awaited the Macho Man's decision. Savage thanked each of them for their attention, then introduced his manager, a knockout brunette beauty who gracefully walked into the ring. WWF announcers Vince McMahon and Bruno Sammartino were dumbfounded, with Sammartino saying she must be a movie star, and a lusty McMahon saying, "That is a gorgeous, gorgeous lady." Miss Elizabeth had arrived and the wrestling world would never be the same. Sadly though, she would share the fate of many of her peers from this era, dying well before her time. Although Elizabeth was by no means wrestling's first good-looking valet, she was one of a kind. Ironically, wrestling legend has it that Vince McMahon originally wanted her to portray the traditional valet to a heel, a conniving heelish woman. During the 80s, vixens such as Precious, Baby Doll and Fallen Angel aka Nancy Sullivan set male fans' hearts aflutter, even as they helped the heels they managed cheat their way to victory. In Elizabeth's case, McMahon was going to make her a somewhat different heel by portraying her as a savvy but ruthless businesswoman. But plans changed. Instead, Elizabeth played a sweet, kind valet who was paired with a ruthless heel who treated her like dirt, using her as a human shield during matches and could browbeat her at any moment. Although Savage was never portrayed as being physically abusive, his character crossed the line into verbal and psychological abuse. It was this distinction that made for a unique dynamic, a beautiful woman who could have anyone she wanted but chose to stay with a brutish man. fans had to wonder how long it would be before Elizabeth came to her senses. As has long been reported, Savage was extremely jealous with Elizabeth behind the scenes. Given pro wrestling's boys will be boys atmosphere, it's understandable why Savage wanted to protect his wife from the excess of the business, particularly traveling on the road. In the book Tributes To, Dave Meltzer details the intensity of Savage's jealousy. Stories of Savage being possessive of her were legendary. In the WCW days, Bobby Heenan used to sing the song "How Do You Handle a Hungry Man" from a TV dinner theme song whenever she'd come to talk with him. She had confided to him that when Randy was on the road, he'd buy a TV dinner for every night he was gone, because he never wanted her leaving the house. According to some stories, Savage would lock Elizabeth in a dressing room when he wasn't with her or have road agents guard her from other wrestlers. Savage allegedly even attacked a fan who grabbed Elizabeth, a move that would have led to other wrestlers being terminated. Savage's behavior caught the attention of his colleagues. Bret Hart likened Elizabeth to a bird in a cage, reflecting on Savage's jealous nature, a reoccurring theme in the Savage-Elizabeth relationship, both on screen and off. Savage was protective of his wife, sometimes leading to consequences for other wrestlers. In the book Titan Screwed, James Dixon discusses a 1992 incident during a WWF European tour where the always obnoxious Brian Knobbs was waiting in line at an airport and farted loudly, apparently unaware Elizabeth was standing behind him. According to Dixon, a furious Savage confronted one half of the Nasty Boys, telling him, "How dare you do that in front of my wife?" Savage reportedly went to Vince McMahon and the WWF Kingpin fined Knobbs $7,000. Miss Elizabeth became a beloved fixture in the WWF. Regardless of whether Randy Savage worked as a heel or babyface, the lovely Elizabeth was adored by fans and fellow wrestlers. According to many wrestlers, she was a kind woman who never let success go to her head. The class act she portrayed on camera was the same class act she was in reality. Elizabeth enjoyed life in front of the camera, but eventually she grew tired of it. Despite an angle where she reconciled with Savage and kayfabe married him at 1991 SummerSlam, her marriage was deteriorating, and by 1992 she and Savage divorced the next year. Elizabeth had had enough. While the details are unknown, she decided to leave Randy and wrestling. Their split led to a rift in friendship between Savage and Hulk Hogan, with some reports stating Savage blamed Hulk and Linda for encouraging Elizabeth to ask for a divorce. She quietly left the glamorous world of the WWF and went to work in retail as a salesperson. However, the siren call of wrestling would eventually bring her back. Around 1995, Elizabeth put out feelers to WCW about joining the promotion. At first, WCW officials were reluctant. According to Dave Meltzer's Tributes To, WCW booker Kevin Sullivan was lobbying to bring his wife Nancy, aka Woman, to manage Savage. In the end, Eric Bischoff realized the possibilities since Randy Savage was working in WCW at the time. Elizabeth joined WCW, reuniting with the Macho Man on screen, but not behind closed doors. Even their on-screen relationship was not to last. Elizabeth turned heel, joining Nature Boy Ric Flair and later the New World Order. In 1997, Elizabeth married attorney Carrie Lubetsky. Ironically, the fear Savage had concerning his wife working in the business ended up coming true, albeit for someone else. In 1999, Elizabeth was paired with Lex Luger in a storyline role. Both Elizabeth and Lex were married to different people at the time, but their spending so much time on the road led to their developing a romantic relationship. As Luger details in his autobiography, Wrestling with the Devil, "Because of the new storyline, I was now around Elizabeth more often. As can happen in any working relationship, the more time you spend with someone who has the same background and interest as you do, the more you get to know each other and can begin to enjoy each other's company." One day early on, a friend of Elizabeth's mentioned that Elizabeth had a thing for me. Although it was intriguing, I didn't think very much about the comment at the time. Not long afterward, I found myself in a full-blown extramarital relationship with Elizabeth. According to Luger, their relationship was a poorly kept secret, and Luger's colleagues began asking him if he was romantically involved with Elizabeth, something he denied. However, the relationship continued, even after Luger's friend Sting confronted him about it. Elizabeth and her second husband divorced in 1999, and she continued seeing Luger. By the summer of 2001, WCW had been bought by the WWF, and Luger was renting an apartment to help his son, who had enrolled in a private school. The apartment made it convenient for Luger and Elizabeth's tryst to continue. By this time, Luger was abusing alcohol and drugs, even as he tried to build up a nutrition business while he rode out his WCW contract. The affair with Elizabeth seemed all the easier since Luger had the apartment for his son. That is until Luger's son Brian came home unexpectedly. In a classic move out of the Players Club handbook, Luger stashed Elizabeth in a bedroom closet for several hours until he took his son out for a meal. As often happens, Luger slipped up and his wife discovered his infidelity after he left Valentine's Day presents from Elizabeth on his kitchen table. Lex's wife called him out on his infidelity, but Luger was able to get a second chance. Undeterred, Luger obtained a cell phone for Elizabeth so he could continue his affair. By 2002, he even had a second home built behind his wife's back, which he planned to use for his rendezvous with the still lovely Elizabeth. However, a paperwork slip-up led to Luger's wife discovering the home. His marriage deteriorated further after he lied to his wife about going to a rehab facility. Luger wasn't the only person battling personal demons. In 2003, one of Elizabeth's friends stopped by Luger's townhouse to tell him she was worried about Elizabeth's drug and alcohol use. According to Luger, the previous 6 months, there had been signs of Elizabeth increasing the amount she needed for a buzz, but to be quite honest, I was too focused on myself to think of what was happening to her. Elizabeth's friend pointed out how accident-prone Elizabeth had become. Luger told the friend he would talk to Elizabeth, and in his autobiography, he claims he did. Whatever he did say to Elizabeth had no effect. In the spring of 2003, Elizabeth's life was falling apart. On the 19th of April 2003, police responded to a report of a domestic dispute between Luger and Elizabeth. Elizabeth reportedly sustained 2 bruised eyes, a bump on the head, and a cut on the eye. Luger was taken into custody and charged with misdemeanor battery. Luger would dispute the account, claiming in his book that Elizabeth began walking her 2 dogs when, about 10 feet down the driveway, the 2 dogs began romping after each other, and their leashes wrapped around Elizabeth's leg. She became hog-tied and fell down on the driveway hard, hurting her arm and shoulder and scraping her face under her right eye. It all happened in an instant. When I ran over to help her up, she insisted she was fine. We went inside and put a bag of ice on her eye. Luger claims that a few days later, he and Elizabeth had an argument, leading to a neighbor calling the police. When the police saw her injuries, they arrested him on the domestic dispute charge. Luger claims Elizabeth was upset that Luger was charged and that the charges were dropped. 2 days later, Luger was charged with DUI, while Elizabeth was a passenger. On the 1st of May 2003, Lex Luger and Elizabeth were relaxing at Luger's second home when Luger discovered Elizabeth was not breathing. Just hours earlier, he and Elizabeth were reportedly watching movies. In his autobiography, Luger recalls, "When I got back from Blockbuster, I popped in an Arnold Schwarzenegger flick. We partied with a few pills and cocktails, but kept it light. I was really into the movie, but I did notice that Elizabeth kept dozing on and off. She'd wake up during the loud action scenes, then closed her eyes again. I didn't think too much of it since it was late. I figured she was tired." Luger eventually realized Elizabeth was more than tired. When he brought her to dinner, Elizabeth was non-responsive. Luger recalls, "When she didn't open her eyes, I decided to gently pull up one of her eyelids. I was immediately startled. Her eye was completely dilated. Something was terribly wrong. I could feel it in my gut. I ran to the phone and dialed 911. However, it was too late. Despite efforts to resuscitate her, Elizabeth died at the hospital. Her death was ruled as an accidental overdose." Elizabeth's accidental overdose stunned the wrestling world. Luger was charged with multiple felony counts of possession of drugs, which led to some blaming Luger for Elizabeth's death. People seemed astonished that someone as wholesome as Elizabeth could have ended up dying from a drug overdose. However, the autopsy confirms she died of a drug overdose, reminding people alcohol and drug abuse can happen to anyone. Although Elizabeth's life ended tragically, her legacy continues as one of the most important women in professional wrestling. Despite only having worked a handful of matches, Elizabeth was involved in some of wrestling's biggest angles during the 80s, and many consider her to have been an integral part of Randy Savage's success in the WWF. Elizabeth has yet to enter the WWE Hall of Fame, but the First Lady of Professional Wrestling remains first in the hearts of millions of fans, and needs no further validation. Well guys, that's episode 19 of Behind the Titantron. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please do us a favor though, if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like and share it to as many social media platforms as possible. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.